that, and everyone went quiet.
It was amazing, yeah. I was just thinking, has anyone seen Phil? Has anyone seen Phil? Oh, good. He is here. That's a relief. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to Zone. Fantastic to see so many people here. Lots of familiar faces, but lots of new faces as well. Also, welcome to the people who are watching this on a live stream, which is appropriate given the content. So I know we've got some people in our office in Bristol and our colleagues and friends over in Germany and Kiev in particular. So it's great to have you here. My role is to do nothing more than to introduce our speaker today, Phil Nottingham, who's been with us for 3 or 4 months now as a video strategist. Phil's got a really interesting background which encompasses theatre, choreography, set design, SEO, bit of tech geek kind of stuff. He's been a really valuable addition to the team and a very experienced speaker, so we're all expecting great things. So no pressure, Phil. Over to you. Seamless handover.
Thank you. Right, I'm afraid we only have one microphone, so this is going to look slightly clunky for a couple of minutes. Thank you all very much for coming and skiving off work for a couple of hours this morning to have some free food. Listen to me speak. Hopefully it will be worth it. And I'm going to apologise for a couple of things in advance. Firstly, I typically talk really fast. I'm going to try and talk really slow today because we have a live stream. And also, I'm going to try and move a lot less than I normally do because we have a live stream. So I might seem a bit stilted and a bit slow, but hopefully you can all cope with that. Additionally, I'm going to try and take things relatively simply. I think we have a kind of mixed level of knowledge and skill set in the audience. So apologies if some of this is kind of old ground for some of you. Hopefully there's still some new stuff as well. And I'm going to be around all day. So if you fancy hanging out and grabbing coffee afterwards, please come find me. I'll be happy to chat. So let's kick right in. Building brands in a post-TV world. So I'm sure this isn't news to anybody, but TV has changed fairly dramatically. We're back. So TV has changed fairly dramatically. What was for most of us as we grew up just a screen on the wall is now a very different experience for most people and most children growing up. To them, TV is a screen that they have in front of them on a beanbag. It's a phone. It's something on a wall. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Just as the internet is everywhere, TV is everywhere. And children and people growing up now don't really think of TV as a particular mode of content. In some senses, YouTube is very much TV to the new generation, as is Facebook and Amazon and Netflix and Vimeo and Instagram and Vine. I think you get the idea. All of these things are now essentially TV platforms in some sense. So TV has evolved, and while we often talk about TV dying, it's not that TV is dying, it's just kind of merged into everyday life. And the kind of content which we consume online, the video content, much of it is to some people TV, to some people video, and ultimately it doesn't matter. So short form video is consumed in the same way that TV is now, where people will just go browse, pick something to watch and watch it. And yet our approach as marketers to creative has more or less stayed pretty much the same. We haven't particularly evolved our approach to advertising or creative to new formats. We've more or less relied on the format that's worked for the last 60, 70 years, which is something like this. We will find a creative agency who we think are very good and come up with a compelling idea that fits with our brand. We'll get them to come up with a great campaign idea, fantastic advert. We'll then find a media agency, some media planners who know exactly where to distribute this content, where our audience are going to be and how we can get it in front of them. And then we're going to judge success based on the reach that we achieve through this distribution and the recall which we get, the way at which it lifts up our brand. And this is pretty much true for the vast majority of companies out there. But the problem is it doesn't really work that well. And we're looking at an old model here that very much fits the kind of Mad Men model, where you have a great creative. Sorry, the clicker's gone a bit weird. We have a great creative mind who's in charge of all the wonderful, great ideas, and then you have a great distribution mind who's in charge of getting it in front of people. And these two are more or less split down the middle, and we divorce the entire process. And so when we come to digital, we have a slight problem because we are viewing success often based on a couple of things, namely number of impressions, which hasn't really evolved from TV, so the amount of people we can get in front of, And for video specifically, impressions are essentially views, so the number of people who viewed our content. But it doesn't really work. And we're noticing that actually a lot of these metrics are not what we might think they are. So when you're judging views, actually what you find, and a study recently that came out last week in Bloomberg has shown that a vast majority of audiences, but a significant sum of audiences and traffic and clicks to ads are essentially fake. They're just bots and spiders. And Google haven't been able to solve this for YouTube because it's very hard to stop just a bot loading a page and an advert running on it. So when you see that you have 1 million views, this doesn't necessarily mean that 1 million people watched it. And on Facebook, a view is essentially only 3 seconds. So if somebody wafts past your videos, they're scrolling through Facebook, that's going to trigger as a view on your view counter. So you're led to believe, well, somebody's actually watched this content. But in reality, does it really represent a level of people have now installed ad block, which basically means that you are serving ads in the source code of a page, and yet the content is not actually being delivered to the individual who's loaded the page because they've installed a plugin which makes sure that the ad and the content is not visible. So you're still paying for the distribution, and yet actually in reality you're not getting in front of people. And the problem is that when we talk about impressions and views, this is ultimately what we're measuring, is just successful page loads. Somebody loads up a page, or rather a browser loads up a page, and content is successfully delivered to the client from the server. And we, throughout all of marketing, seem to view this is what we're actually measuring, as a way of saying somebody's watched our content, somebody's engaged with it. And we optimize our distribution strategies for this. So we optimize our distribution for robots, for spiders, for technology rather than people. And there's wider problems with the way in which we're distributing to people as well, which come through filter bubbles. So Google personalized search. I don't know how many of you are aware that the fact that the results that you're going to receive in Google are going to radically differ from the results that somebody else is going to receive, based on your location, the sites you visited before, the kind of things you've shared, your activity on YouTube, your activity on Google+, your activity on email. All your activity online is affecting the way in which Google serves you content if you're logged in. So you might not see certain kinds of sites that other people are going to. And it's even worse for Facebook with Facebook EdgeRank. So Facebook EdgeRank basically means that you are shown content by the people and the brands and the pages which you actively engage with. And while you may do a promoted post on Facebook, it's not necessarily going to get to people unless they are actively engaging with your content and your brand more generally. So what this means is that pay to play actually doesn't mean pay to play at all. It means pay to stand in the queue, pay to potentially line up to have your content served to somebody. And this is a major challenge for us because with TV, we're used to being able to think in terms of the model, well, I'm just going to pay some money here in an effective method of distribution, get it in front of people, and then they will watch it in some form. But now we can pay that money and we're not necessarily actually getting it in front of people at all. And so we spend a great deal of money on online distribution that ultimately doesn't actually lead to any real brand uplift at all. And we have another problem again in that the way in which we judge success is through metrics provided to us by the people who we are paying for the distribution. So we have to take Facebook's word for how many video views we're getting and what the engagement is. And we have to take Google's word for how well our ad spend is running. And so if any of you have ever worked in big brands, which I'm sure many of you have, who have a kind of account manager for YouTube or account manager for Instagram or an account manager for Facebook or an account manager for YouTube, etc., you'll probably find that the advice that you get from them if they ask you how you can improve the campaign is always along the lines of you need to spend more money in a certain area. And normally your campaign is probably working quite well. You very, very rarely get them saying, oh, actually it's not working, you should probably not spend money here. Because they're incentivized to tell you to spend more money. So where Google was once a search engine, it is now, It is now a giant multinational advertising network. So Google was originally a search engine with an ad service that was added on, and now it's an ad service with the search engine. And Facebook was once a social network with an ad platform, and now it's an ad platform with a social network. So their priorities have shifted, and they're naturally incentivized to tell you that everything you're doing is great, and the metrics are therefore going to be skewed because we're relying on the same people we're giving the money to tell us how well it's performing. And this cannot be sustainable. But the problem is that our goals are still the same, right? We still ultimately want to distribute content to people and have them watch it and love it and applaud our content, engage with our brand, and care about us, which will hopefully lead to a greater uplift in sales, revenue, sign-ups, etc. So we're still trying to achieve the same thing that we always have with TV, but we're just dealt a hand where we have a very, very complicated method of distribution, a very complicated method of delivering content, and a very complicated method of measuring it effectively. And stories have and always will be, I think, the best way in which we're going to deliver these messages. Everything that we do creatively is ultimately still some form of storytelling. Even if it's in a small level, if it's on a big level, it doesn't really matter. And of course, video, as it has been with the success of TV, is still a very compelling medium to deliver content. So video is ultimately, it's image, right? It's that artistic side, it's music, it's got pace, it's got sound, and it's also got a narrative. So it's a very compelling and immersive method of storytelling. So you can deliver a lot of information in a very short period of time, which is why it's an effective form of advertising and why it will continue to be an effective form of storytelling, brand advertising, and content marketing. However, the way in which we've approached it has to change. And so our old model, where essentially mindshare was measured by eyeballs. So if you are working just in TV and offline media, billboards, etc., if you can get enough eyeballs on the content in the right time, in the right place, then you're going to increase brand equity. But this doesn't work anymore because you can't buy eyeballs in the most effective way that you used to be able to. So actually our new model is that engagement equals mindshare. So the more people who are sharing your content, the more people who are engaging with your content, watching it online, etc., the more likely you are to receive that brand lift. But the problem is engagement is a very hard thing to buy effectively. And it's a very hard thing to accurately say, well, I'm going to spend £1,000 here and I'm going to receive this much return. I'm going to spend £100,000 here and receive that much return. Whereas when we were buying just media placements, it was much simpler. And so what we end up doing, and a lot of brands end up doing, is falling back to essentially trying to spam and optimize for the result of engagement rather than engagement itself. So you see things like this, where you can spend $5 and get 5,000 high-quality Twitter followers. These obviously aren't real people. They're not high quality, but ultimately we're chasing the metric. We're chasing the outcome or the signifier of the outcome rather than the outcome of engagement itself. And then we're doing things like this. Apologies to anybody from Wimpy here, but I think it's fair to say this isn't brilliant. If I favorite this to say that I want a cheeseburger, am I really engaging with the brand? Is this really an effective method of saying that we're delivering distribution in this way? I'm not sure that it is, and yet we're so focused on these metrics, retweets, favorites, Facebook likes, number of followers, etc., assuming that the more we get on this front, the more we're likely to be achieving that brand equity that we always want. So how can we fix this? How can we essentially buy engagement in the way in which we thought about TV in this new multifaceted, multiplicitous digital world? Well, you're probably expecting me here at Zone, an agency that's for many, many years built its reputation on content and content creation, to say the answer is going to be create more great content. But the problem is this isn't going to work either. There was a survey done a couple of months ago by a company called Moz, based out of Seattle, who do search engine optimization software, and a company called BuzzSumo, who do software for tracking the effectiveness of content online, which basically looked at the insights from the top 1 million shared pieces of content on the web over the last year. So they picked out the top 1 million posts, articles, videos, etc., that were shared and linked to, and then looked at the kind of trends and how they might be, how it's distributed. And what they discovered is that the top 250,000 posts, so the top quarter of 1 million posts, you only actually need 40 shares and 1 referring link to be in that top group. Or put another way, 3/4 of the content of the top 1 million content got very little engagement at all. So actually only 40 shares. So most of the stuff that people are creating, and this includes brands, this includes bloggers, this includes everyone, most of the stuff we're creating, nobody's watching and nobody's caring with. And we are now at a point where we are publishing more content than we have throughout the entire of human history, and most of it is low quality, not very good, not that exciting, and nobody cares. And I think we fall into a trap as brands of assuming, because we have brand equity, the kind of content that we're going to create, if we are an old, big, red brick business of some description, because we've made something, it matters more to people. Whereas in reality, of course, it actually probably matters less, because you have to convince them that you are trustworthy and you have something interesting to say. And just because you're a brand doesn't mean anybody's going to care about your content. In fact, it probably means they're going to care less. So we have an enormous challenge. And if we look at the distribution of the top 1 million posts, we see that overwhelmingly it's skewed towards this front end where the top posts outperform everything by just streets ahead. So essentially the top 1% get all of the coverage and everything else is left to sort of just dwindle and die on the sidelines. And so how do we optimize for a situation where we are trying to basically hit this, right? The viral success, where we're going to get thousands and thousands of shares, lots of engagement, when most of the stuff that most people are creating does essentially nothing. It's extremely hard. And you might say, well, you just need kind of better quality content. It just needs to be better. But that doesn't really work because BuzzFeed are doing extremely well and have an awful lot of shares on a lot of their content. And do we really think 24 things Kanye West did in 2005 that he would never do now is good content? Is this the kind of thing brands should be optimizing for and creating? I'm not sure it is, and I don't think many other people would as well. So it's not just about quality, it's about something else. And I think this is now what's broken. It's thinking quality content plus distribution equals success. So the old model was to say, we need to optimize for what? So what kind of content are we making? The when are we serving it to people? You know, pick the ad slot. Are we going before X Factor? Are we going before British Bake Off, etc.? Well, that's BBC, so no ads. And then the where. So which channels are we optimizing for? Where are we going to put billboards, etc.? And actually, we need to think a bit more expansively in this new world, which I think is to add the why and the how. So it's about what are we creating? When are we serving it? Where are we serving it? Why will people care? And how are people going to engage with it? Come on. So why will people care in the sense that if somebody's not interested in your content, they're not going to engage with it. Unless you can give them that compelling reason to do something with it, to engage, to think about it in the way that it reflects something about themselves and that it engages with them on a meaningful level, you're not going to get anywhere. And unless you have a way in which they're going to engage with the content, to share it to other people, to increase that word of mouth, it's never going to get distributed properly. And to answer those questions, you need a team with a different set of skills. So instead of just having the great creative and the great distributor, I think you now need something that looks a bit more like this. So we have a creative director who is in charge of ultimately the tone of voice, the great creative. But we also need a data analyst to work out where are people searching, what are they looking for, where are people active online, at what times, which platforms are they engaging with. We need a strategist, which is somebody a bit like me who understands search, who understands the technical aspects of different platforms, who understands the types of content people have engaged with previously and why it's worked. You then need a PR who's able to speak to influencers and journalists and bloggers to be able to seed content out there. And you need a paid media specialist who's able to then harness the different programmatic distribution methods which we have now available, like AdWords, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And this, in addition to the creative team that you need to actually make the content which you're going to use to seed out there. And this is exactly the kind of thing which Zone are trying to build. So teams that have these multifunctional capabilities and are able to create content that's going to be relevant and effective and get in front of the right people at the right time and achieve that success that's ultimately going to lead to brand equity and higher sales. So there's a few things which you need to solve, I think, in this new world of creative. The first one is which platforms? With the kind of Don Draper and Harry approach, what you find is that it's mostly content first, right? It's come up with this big picture idea, a great creative, and then distribute it as far and wide as we can. And this is still what most people do. But this doesn't really work because media types are fluid. I mean, if we think about a Vine, is a Vine a video? Is it a GIF? Is it an image sequence? What is a Vine? It's kind of a mixed media platform. We think about Facebook. You can do images on Facebook. You can do posts. You can do videos. You can do all these different things. So we work in this world where actually the kind of media which we're working with is not set. We don't have like a billboard frame like this. We don't have a video sequence that must be 30 seconds and 15. We have an arsenal of different kinds of media types that mean we can express ourselves in whatever way we really want to. So actually I think we need to think instead of content first, we think platform first. So we work out where are our audience engaging, where are they present, and where are they active, and when. We then need to choose the platforms to focus on based on where we're going to be able to get the biggest return. So where there's a lack of saturation and where people are active. We then need to create the content specifically for the platform, which I'll get onto, but basically means you need to think about the way in which people are going to engage with the content on that platform and then take a second action. And then you need to cross-promote on other platforms. So be able to then take the content that you've created and make sure you're distributing it effectively. And I think thinking platform first means actually you need to understand and consider the technical aspects of different platforms in a very in-depth and creative manner. So if we take this example from Jamie Oliver's FoodTube, you look at the end here, these three things, I don't know if you can see them very well, but they're links. So there's a link to buy a book, and there's a link to watch another video, and then there's a link to subscribe to their channel. These look very nicely done and very interesting. This is all done in post-production, and what they then do is put these little overlays called annotations on YouTube that make them clickable links. But unless you understand that that's how YouTube works, you can't build into the creative process this understanding that if you make these compelling links, people are more likely to click them than if you just do it in post-production. So you need to consider the technical elements of content creation in pre-production, way before you've even engaged that creative director, to understand how you're going to get people to engage on these specific platforms. So you couldn't just take this video and make it work on Instagram. You'd need to shift it and change it around. Same with Facebook. So you need to think very granular about the way in which these different platforms are working for you. If we look at Facebook, it's actually, I think more than this now, but close to a third of Facebook users only use Facebook on their mobile. And Facebook is overwhelmingly a mobile platform now. I mean, I'm sure most of you have this too. You get out your phone, middle of the day, you're just going to be flicking through and looking at Facebook. That's your typical use case in where you're doing it. But this has a number of ramifications for content. So Facebook video is mobile video, basically, as good as mobile video. And we normally think of video as being watched through this kind of frame, but in reality on Facebook, it's normally watched through this kind of frame. So that has a bunch of implications for our creative. We probably need to think in terms of vertical video or different framings for Facebook to make it more effective. Because if we have just a horizontal, normal 16:9 video like we would have on YouTube, it's going to look a bit crappy, and it's not going to be as interesting as a full screen experience. So that's what platforms. And then we need to work out what's worked before. And there's a bunch of tools available now that will allow you to do this. And I think that strategists and analysts need these kind of skills and need to develop and hone these abilities. So you can use things like BuzzSumo, which will explain to you the top shared content in any particular vertical and niche based on media type. And you can use Unruly Analytics specifically for video that's going to show you the top shared content across different industries, how different people have engaged with content, exactly who's shared it and who's been the instigators of virality in terms of distribution. And I think that if you start to understand how things are constructed by breaking them apart and being able to look at an old viral success and say, well, how and why did this go viral? What was the kind of reason for the fact that somebody shared this a bunch of times? Why did this video get viewed lots of times? How was it constructed? What was the timeline? What was the music like? What was the narrative like? What was the pace? What was the image, etc.? The more you can deconstruct these things, I think you become a much better strategist and an analyst at working out what's going to be successful for your brand. And yet many of us don't spend a lot of time doing this and breaking down why something worked before. You then, if you're doing creative, need to work out whether there's existing demand for your content. So this is essentially optimizing for search and for social. And so you can use tools like sort of the Google Keyword Planner that any PPC analyst or SEO is going to be very capable at doing to work out for a specific branding content idea, is there existing demand out there? And we can also use things like the keyword opportunity score from Moz, which will tell us, are we, if we as a brand go and create this content, likely to be able to rank on the first page of Google for it? On things like Google Trends, we can find out whether or not people are using YouTube in a way to search for content that we might be able to create, and find out if there's opportunity there for us to create some content and likely just build success off the fact that people are looking for something and there's a gap in the market. We also need to work out how it's going to be seeded. And so the temptation that we've previously had, where we'll normally go, well, we need to make sure that people are going to watch it, so we're going to spend this much on media, doesn't necessarily work. In fact, I think the best way to think about this is that organic potential is like a guitar, and paid distribution is like an amplifier. You can't effectively distribute or pay to distribute content unless it has that organic potential. There's no use having an amplifier on its own without that guitar. You still need that core and the reason to share and the reason to watch. So you cannot fix relatively mediocre content just by throwing media spend at it. And yet, that's what many, many brands do to save face. And I think influencer partnerships is going to be a very important part of this, and it is currently a very important part of it at Zone, where we find the right people who are going to seed content out, the right people who are going to tweet it, share it on their websites, that hopefully give that initial push that's likely to ensure that you get more shares over time. And then lastly, we also need to work out what's the distribution hook. So if anybody has ever worked on a kind of piece that's been very successful, has gone viral, or has ever gone and broken down a piece that has done before in terms of the way in which it's shared and the way in which people talk about it, you'll find that it's not just lists of people going, this is really great content, share, 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 share. It's always a conversation. And so you have to understand in this world of social media and and sort of this post-TV world that actually content is not the conversation. Content is the starting point for conversation. And so as a creative, you have to understand, well, the content I'm creating is just the starting point. I need to create something that's going to make people want to talk about what we're doing and what we're saying in a much more meaningful way and allow that debate and allow the conversation to flourish, because that's when your brand becomes front and center of people's minds and the way in which they're thinking. And you'll notice this is true, all the kind of the work that Dove did with the Real Beauty sketches, etc. It was all about, the fact that women aren't kind enough to themselves in the way in which they're describing their appearance, and that becomes a talking point. If you look at the Jean-Claude Van Damme splits thing that the Volvo trucks did, the conversation was all about, did he really do that? That's crazy, I wonder how he did it. This is the way in which people talk about content. It's not about the content themselves, it's about the way in which the content was created, what it means, what it stands for. So instead of thinking, what do you want people to say about your campaign? Actually, I think in many ways the way in which we need to think about what we're our approach to content is really, how do we want people to feel about our company? How do we want people to express their feelings towards us? Do we have an emotion or a perspective that we want to try and get across to our consumers that will then hopefully lift the way in which they're thinking about our brand when they go into store or whether they're buying online, etc. So a study last year showed that actually more than 81% of millennials expect companies to make a public commitment to good corporate citizenship. I think this isn't news to anyone. At Zone, we do an awful lot of pro-social work, so this is something that we're very experienced with. But what this really means as an important factor for businesses is that just we exist to make money is not really enough anymore. You have to have a broader mission and a vision and a perspective on the world which you are disseminating and giving to your customers in a way that they can carry it and feel like they're connected to your community in a meaningful way. Put simply, you need to be able to stand for something. And so your brand is not necessarily what you sell, it's how you go about selling it. And that's ultimately the job of content and what content can do for you. So we've moved away from direct response advertising where it's just buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. But actually, advertising and creative is now more about an emotion, a feeling, an approach, rather than just about what it is that your product does. So Nike are obviously very good at this. They've done a lot of stuff about everyone's an athlete. And it's an emotion, it's a perspective, and that's why you buy Nike, because you feel like, well, I want to be part of that approach where I can be a sporty person, even though I like eating all the pies or whatever, as I do. How can you actually make this work? Because all this sounds great in theory, but of course it's extremely hard to do it in practice, and I can stand here and preach this all day, and in reality it's not going to be easy for you to go away and do something. So I want to give you just a few tips that you can go away today and hopefully action when you get back to the office. Firstly, I think this is what most content strategies look like for most businesses, right? You'll be going, well, somebody somewhere said we need to be doing a blog, so we've got a blog. And then someone said we need to be on Facebook. And then somebody said we need to be on YouTube. And then, oh goodness, Pinterest came out. And now we've got Snapchat, we've got Vine, or Tinder's monetizing. Like the problem is it's just becoming a never-ending stream of platforms. And the perspective that people often get is, well, we need to be visible everywhere. We need content on all these different platforms, and we need to make sure that we're doing stuff for every kind of marketing medium that we have out there. And then, of course, you just end up doing a lot of things very badly, and you spread yourself very thin, and nobody actually engages and nobody cares, and you start being delighted that you've got 30 followers on Twitter, and it's just ultimately you're speaking to an empty room, but lots of empty rooms. And I would actually advise, instead of doing that brands should think a bit more simply and focus, and just pick like a couple of channels to be really good at. And that's going to differ from brand to brand and from company to company based on the way in which you can effectively speak to your target audience. But in reality, you need to just pick a couple that make most sense to you, where your audience is visible, and where you're likely to be able to gain traction because it's not saturated. Pick those two and just focus on doing a really good job of those. If you get one channel right, you'll find that it's easier to build that audience there and then disseminate out to others rather than trying to build everything up from scratch initially. Particularly as Instagram integrates with Twitter and integrates with Facebook, for example. And YouTube integrates very well with Facebook and all these things. So you only really need one channel to do very well in order to then see lift across them all. But when you try to do everything all at the same level, it just doesn't go particularly well. So just pick one or two and focus on those. The other thing I think is to think about shifting the way in which you're spending your cash. So I think probably this is a reasonable benchmark for what most businesses do in terms of creation and distribution. We'll probably spend about 30% of our cash on content creation, particularly for TV. So you might spend like £100,000 on the creative, and then £300,000 or so on the distribution. And actually, I think that we should probably think about shifting this slightly, far more in favour of the creation, because in order to hit that, in favour of the creation, so to spend about 70% of the budget on the content creation and 30% on distribution. Now, you're obviously thinking, you would say that sat in Zone, where they're ultimately a creative content agency. But the truth is that in order to get here, in order to actually get success, you need to be doing much more than just creating one thing and then throwing media distribution behind it, because it doesn't really help. You need to be doing a lot more content in order to potentially have a chance of finding something that's going to be successful. So I would spend much more time on creating new content rather than just trying to optimize existing content, because you cannot do that. If you have content that ultimately isn't very good, you cannot fix it with media spend. It's not possible. And then lastly, the last point I want to make is about failure. So this is obviously a famous quote from Thomas Edison. I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And this is true for all content marketing. You are not going to get it right first time or even second time. Think about sites like BuzzFeed or New York Times. Most of their content actually doesn't do that well, but they optimize their process to occasionally get that one successful thing that does very well for them. And you will often find as a brand that you will create some content that's very successful and then some content that does nothing. And that's normal and that's natural and that's okay. But in order to optimize for those potential big hits that are going to really have that tangible benefit for you, you need to be creating more content and ultimately doing more stuff and optimizing for failure and then learning fast to iterate and improve over time. And so I would very much advise people to stop thinking in terms of, I'm doing content marketing and I need to be spending £1 here and getting this much return, and thinking about ROI in a very granular, small sense, and think of ROI far more in a broad campaign that may take a couple of years, where you're building up content, you're trying lots of things and seeing if that works. Because if you just focus on, we're trying things once, and if it doesn't work for us, we've assumed it doesn't work, you're approaching this in entirely the wrong way. It's not a kind of cash in, cash out situation. It takes time to iterate and improve. So lastly, some of you are probably thinking, what about measurement? You spent a significant part of the first part of the presentation bashing views and impressions as kind of crummy metrics that are just filled with spam. What should we actually be measuring for video and content marketing? I think it's two things. For video particularly, it's about retention. So the main thing to be looking at is, if somebody's watching your video, if you're using YouTube or Facebook or your own platform, you'll be able to get a retention graph that basically shows you how often your audience are clicking away from the content. And you need to optimize to ensure that you are losing as fewer people throughout the journey of your video as possible. If you see a great big drop off after a few seconds, the hook isn't good enough. If you see a great big drop off after 20 seconds, probably the actual content idea is not very good itself. And if you see a big drop off at the end, maybe you don't have a clear enough call to action or a next thing that you're trying to get people to do to engage with your brand. So optimize for keeping people on your content so that they are engaging with it, viewing it, and getting those brand impressions that you would have been able to do in the world of TV. And then optimize for action. And so by action, I'm going to leave you with this metric, which I want you to go away and apply to all of the content which you have previously created, which is action rate. And what this basically means is somebody watched my video or read my blog and then did something with it. So instead of just reading it or viewing it and then going away, they then took a next action. So maybe they shared it, maybe they clicked through to another page to read another article or watch another video, maybe they left a comment, maybe they subscribed to my channel. And look at the rate in which people are doing that compared with the views, and this will give you a much better indication of success and the brand, the real impression that you're making on people, as opposed to just the rough view counter that you're going to see in the Facebook and YouTube metrics. So that's it from me. Any questions, thoughts? Otherwise, I'll leave you to get more pastries.
We're going to try and organise questions a little bit, because there's lots and lots of people. Thank you. Can we just say thank you to Carlo?
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a long...
All right.
Almost Jeremy Corbyn like. Can I just get a sense of how many people want to ask a question, and that will dictate later. If you've got a thought, you want to say something or ask a question, you slightly just raise your hand a little bit. You don't have to put it up very high. No one. Oh, Jennifer, you're great. Go. Well, let's just start with Jennifer, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Hello.
You need to repeat the question.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Jennifer. Can you say? Yes. Yeah.
Question, because then
Sure, yeah, I should repeat. Sorry about that. So Jennifer basically asked, with the model of where I think you need at least 5 people rather than 2, so you need a PR, a paid distribution specialist, a strategist who understands search and social, a data analyst, and a creative director. Can you get all those people if you swap your budget? Yes, I think you absolutely can, and I think that's kind of what you need to do. And I would encourage people to spend more money on less content, so optimize for quality rather than quantity in a sense. So if you're spending a few £1,000s on a creative content marketing campaign, actually I think I would look at upping the quality and the focus that you're having on that creative, and spend the time, make sure you're getting the resource to ensure that it's really focused on the right platforms, optimize the right terms, push towards the right audience, because it's going to have a much bigger benefit for you than just creating something and then spending that additional money on the distribution.
speak very loud.
Yeah, yes, I agree. Television is, oh. So the question is, do I think TV advertising is changing? Sky are bringing out some interesting new technology. There's a lot of disruption in the space, and it's quite exciting in many ways. And yes, I do agree. I think that TV advertising is an exciting space. My approach would be to, I don't really think of it as TV advertising as such anymore. I think of it as kind of it's part of that ubiquitous content marketing. So you can create a great YouTube video and then use that as a TV ad, or you can do it vice versa. So there's been lots of examples of successful campaigns starting in very many places and then expanding out. So I wouldn't think of it as like TV versus digital, which is, I think, the problem that many brands fall into. Increasingly, everything is becoming some shade of digital. TV itself as a technology is digital now. You get over-the-top delivery, which basically means it comes in through your Ethernet as much as it does through your Skybox. So there's a real kind of convergence of media and advertising types, which is why there's excitement in TV, but I think there's excitement everywhere actually in that regard.
Hi, do you think it's possible to create content that, as you say, generates conversation in a smaller budget?
Absolutely. So the question is, do I think it's possible to create content that resonates in a meaningful way on a smaller budget? Yes, absolutely. I think there's probably a minimum threshold of a couple of, if you work in an agency, of like at least a few £1,000s. But yeah, I've seen many examples of small businesses that have done very, very well with content marketing. I used to work with a website called concerthotels.com. There's a hotel affiliate website run by one man and his wife, and they run it out of their own bedroom in Cambridge, and they have had ridiculous viral success, spending a very small amount of money just by being very focused on the kind of content they're making, working out that their audience like stuff that's about music, and spending a little bit of money on some real fun interactives. Go check out the website concerthotels.com and go and see how many searches they've got. You'll be so jealous. This is a one-man band outfit.
Can I ask a sub-question?
Mm-hmm.
Does that include the iterations that you talk about having to do, that instant quote about failing 10,000 times to get that one piece that people engage with?
Yeah.
Does that include that?
Yeah.
In terms of the budget?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, it's a great example because they've had some that haven't done very well and some that have done very well. Sure, you need to keep trying stuff out and keep improving. You may take forever, but you may get there eventually. The key is not the testing, it's the learning from the testing, working out what doesn't work. And I think when we take the approach of we create content and then distribute it, we're actually preventing ourselves from learning from the failure because we don't actually analyze what was good or bad or successful about the content. And the assumption that that kind of comes from that traditional advertising world of the media is the thing. So it's, well, billboard advertising didn't work for us, and, oh, well, TV didn't work for us. It's kind of a bit nebulous because all content media types might work for you. The real challenge is the creative correct?
Okay, I thought that might happen. So I'm going to take all 3 questions at once, and then we're going to try and ask Phil to respond to them all. So I'm going to go back to front. So,
yes, wonder how that model changes with live production as opposed to video on demand production.
okay, so it's about live production, video on demand. There's one
Mm-hmm.
there.
In terms of audience engagement for television shows, is there anything that stands out to you as being exceptionally good?
So that's examples of good audience engagement through kind of that kind of television shows. Does that mean or any television?
Any television
Any television, Charles?
Mine was just, we obviously celebrate big viral successes
Yeah.
in video, but who are there brands you can point to who actually do this kind of approach and consistently do great video content?
So there's a couple of the
Yeah.
who's good, and there's
Yeah.
something about live shows.
Okay, so I'll start with the live versus recorded question. So the question was, is there a difference in live productions versus recorded productions? Is that basically true?
How the process of that distribution works,
Yeah.
and how your model shifts slightly.
Sure, so how more shifts. Yes, I think to some extent it does. I'm from World of Theatre, so I'm originally used to doing the live production thing in a very sort of completely live way. So in a sense, if you are doing a live production, you have to build up the traction in advance of it going live. So you can't just promote content, leave it sitting there publish something, leave it sitting there for a while, and then work out a promotion plan, which you can do with recorded video. With live stuff, you have to kind of do that in advance of the actual production. So you have to have supporting content that's going to be, generating that demand. It might be advertising, it might be small snippets of video. This is actually true for TV productions as well. So HBO did some quite nice stuff with Game of Thrones coming out, where they did short little trailers on Vines and Instagrams that were like, it's coming up to kind of, get everybody watching it together, and then of course that conversation ends up happening online. So for TV as a media, there's still an absolute value in the kind of live production. Everything is not necessarily, watched on demand. So I think there is still that live thing, because it's about that community experience, like watching sport, where you are doing it all together, and it's that kind of, and the same with theatre. So I think that there is a difference in that you need to kind of front load a bunch of your promotion. In terms of the motivators for watching, the fact that you still need to retain people, the fact that there's still the conversation, I think all of that remains pretty much exactly the same. Who's there
was
one about
all the kind of TV that's working,
kind of,
getting
yeah.
the level of engagement you like, and also the brands that do well.
So I work for businesses who are using content to market their products. I don't really work with media companies creating TV as such. So I don't know that I've got any particular examples of TV that's done well to engagement, but you can see a bunch of, what I will say is there's a kind of a differentiation of live stuff like sport, like the X Factor, like Bake Off, weirdly, where everybody's watching it together and that conversation happens at the same time. And there was a report recently about second screening, so people using omni screening, they call it, where people are using like iPads and tablets and phones to basically use Twitter while they're watching. And actually most of their engagement's on Twitter, but it's the TV becomes kind of the interesting impetus for the conversation that becomes the engagement. And that's quite an interesting facet of kind of the live production versus the on-demand stuff, which is mostly about kind of binge watching and everything Netflix is optimized for. So Netflix have done like a really good job of just having that epic database where people can find all this different kind of content. And then the last one, Giles, brands doing good stuff. Brewdog have done some really, really cool stuff. So Brewdog have never done TV advertising, and they've never really had a viral success. Go have a look at some of the cool things they're doing. Slack, is there any Slack? It's like, so there's a lot of good stuff happening in the SaaS world, mostly because it's very technical people who understand about sort of technical marketing and have never tried to do TV in a meaningful way. Who else has done some interesting stuff? HipChat did some really cool stuff as well, similar product to Slack. Sure, there's, loads.
So hopefully Phil works it, so he's around, which is good, and can carry on being around. There's still, I can see food, which is good, and there's coffee, and I'd rather kind of, these forums always promote the extroverts and allow people. So if you want to ask some questions and stuff, Phil's around, or some other people around, lots of the same people standing at the back, so that's good. But thank you again. You get another round of applause.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you for coming. It's always slightly nerve-wracking when you have a party and everyone kind of come. We looked at the chairs this morning and went, are they going to fill up? So that's great. Thanks, guys. We're going to do more of these, so please come again if you found it useful. Please give us feedback. More discussion, or more interactive, or less, or we want this, or two speakers, or whatever. Let us know what you guys want, because we've got this brilliant space now, and we are going to fill it with speakers and do these kind of events. And then for you guys who are our clients and potential clients and stuff, so ask us and tell us what you want, and we'll put them on. And if you want to hear from someone, then we'll try and get them to come down here and talk to you. So thank you very much for coming. Go get coffee and food and go to work.
Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you. Cheers. All right. All right.
Yes, hello, sorry.
Really good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Cheers.
excellent.
Glad you found it useful.
And yeah, not just useful, but entertaining, and I just wanted to say...
Great. Thank you.